In his house at World Wake, dead Rexhal waits dreaming, and Sygg River Cutthroat is just the merman to awaken him. Welcome to another edition with a new commander deck that I've just put together, a blue-black Dimir deck that I've prepared for a game I've got coming up for Halloween, and I'm just sitting here right now mulling over who should actually be the general for the deck. I like both Sygg and I like Rexhal the Risen Deep, but the more I think about it, the more they really complement one another, and not just through their connection to the Church of Cthulhu, but also through their ability to take advantage of the tried and tested Dimir strategy. So Sygg, River Cutthroat, printed in the Shadowmoor set. Bargain commander that you can get down early for 2 mana. His ability is at the end of each turn, if an opponent lost 3 or more life, you may draw a card. So that gives you the Dimir card advantage. And Rexhal the Risen Deep is a bit more steep at 6 mana, but a 5/8 Kraken. I look at the artwork and I really think he should have been printed as a Kraken horror. Island Walk and Swamp Walk, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. So both of these commanders, together, on one hand, you've got a bit of card advantage with Sygg, and on the other hand, you've got the graveyard shenanigans with Rexhal. Sygg provides the Merfolk mechanic, which are really famous for converting opponents' lands into islands, which goes well with Rexhal's desire to pillage your opponent's graveyard and get full value from spells that they hopefully won't be casting themselves. So I've decided to pair them together and work on a deck that brings together the best of both worlds. Both the New World and the Old World, if you know what I mean. So I'll just quickly start with the non-basic lands. So the usual suspects in Dimir Aqueduct, Dimir Guildgate, Dismal Backwater, Submerged Boneyard, Dreadship Reef. Really in here for the flavor. I love that desolate waterscape there. Dagon or Polaris, whatever that story was. Why not? And this is Nephalia Drownyard. So this is the main land that I wanted to show. It really supports the mill strategy, so you can have target player put the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard if you activate the ability there. So quickly with the artifacts, not many to talk about, and all of them are basically mana fixing and mana rocks. So we start with Dark Water Egg. Really just enables you to get Sygg down quickly and draw a card when it's put into the graveyard. Dimir Signet, Prismatic Lens, Mistvein Border Post, a really shiny one there. Dimir Locket, and Thran Dynamo. Thran Dynamo is crucial when you've got a really expensive commander, especially Rexhal being at 6 mana. And it's important to get it down as early as possible to enable yourself to start executing the strategies that you want to do before your opponents can take off and deal with them. The creature base really exploits the Lovecraftian themes, Church of Cthulhu. So water worship, and leading into the higher end, which is the cosmic horror. So the merfolk, summon the otherworld elder ones from the deep, and they all bring the sea to their opponent's door, so to speak. So we start at the lower end with a Marrow Bone Gnawer, Tidal Warrior, which can turn a land into an island, Merfolk Looter, Vodalian Arcanist adds a mana, and you can spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell, but that's fine, since most of this deck is going to be non-permanent spells. Streambed Aquatex, which also can turn a land into an island, but also gives a merfolk +1/+1 in Island Walk until end of turn. Jurubai Murklurker. So, funnily enough, this is not a horror, even though it clearly looks like one. But it gets +1/+1 as long as you control a swamp. But the second ability there interests me. Target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. So, as we'll see shortly, the bigger creatures can turn into some significant life fetchers, and obviously with the Island Walk ability, you're taking full advantage of being able to hit your opponent with unblockable combat damage. Harbor Bandit, mostly in here for the flavor theme, but also to complement the Murklurker. So he's a human rogue, but he gets +1/+1 as long as you control an island, and he can make himself unblockable until end of turn. But that's really a Cthulhu cultist, peeking in through the window there. Chasm Skulker, Squid Horror. I like this card. 3 mana, but whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on it. And when it dies, put X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk onto the battlefield, where X is the number of 1/1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So that's Elder Deep Fiend rising up, and it gives you plenty of island walking creatures to go wide. Graveguild Duo, a double colored creature from Shadowmoor. Whenever you play a blue spell, it gets +1 until end of turn. Whenever you play a black spell, it gains fear until end of turn. So that's really in here to complement Sygg, Riddle Keeper. Again, neither a horror nor a merfolk, but suits the theme and suits what you really want to be doing. For Rexual to take full advantage, whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, so that starts the mill strategy. Merfolk Sea Stalkers and Island Walker and can tap a creature without flying. So we get into Sewer Nemesis, very Lovecraftian with that single eye, gazing at you from the abyss. As it enters the battlefield, choose a player, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in the chosen player's graveyard. So if you get the mill going, specifically targeting that one player, it can get very big very quickly, and whenever the chosen player casts a spell, they put the top card of their library into their graveyard. So Sewer Nemesis is very critical to the milling. We've got Salvager of Secrets, a merfolk that enables some recycling and recursion. Now here's where we start getting into the good stuff. So this is really the coming of Dagon Polaris. So I can't remember what the story was, where the sea encroaches upon the villagers. But Nemesis of Reason, 5 mana, Leviathan Horror. Whenever it attacks, defending player puts the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. And this is a Sewer Nemesis on steroids. Consuming Aberration. Power and toughness each equal to the number of cards in all your opponent's graveyards. So the other great thing is that whenever you cast a spell, each opponent mills until they find a land card, and all revealed cards go into their graveyard. So it also makes you a massive target, because nobody likes milling. Let's be completely honest there. So we get into Guilt Feeder, another horror that takes advantage of the graveyard, but in a different way. 5 mana for a 0/4, but it has fear. And whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, defending player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. So again, this really capitalizes on the milling strategy. I love Voidmoor. Look at that art. Isn't that art very cosmic horror? It has a unique ability that I haven't seen printed since the Cold Snap days. So Trample, 4/5, and if another creature would be put into a graveyard from play, exile it instead. And you may put a card exiled from the game with Voidmoor into its owner's graveyard, and it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So a very unusual, very niche ability there that can spoil a lot of graveyard effects, and also can take away problem creatures. Dark Hatchling, a 3/3 flying horror. So when he enters the battlefield, destroy target non-black creature. I keep referring to these horrors as he's, so I don't think they really play the identity game. Deep Fathom Skulker definitely suits the theme, and the great thing is it's a coastal piracy on a body, so whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And for 4 colorless mana, you can make a creature unblockable until end of turn. This goes really well with the Island Walk approach, and can really help you with that card advantage late game. And the final creature is Slipstream Eel. I don't expect to be casting it very much. It doesn't have Island Walk, funnily enough, but it can only attack when defending player controls an island, so it takes advantage of that to some small degree. 6/6 Fish Beast, but also has cycling. We get to the instant and sorcery spells now, and there's a lot of balance in supporting both Rexual and Sygg through these cards. Aquitect's Will, which can turn a land into an island. Memory Sluice, just a straight mill, but it has a Conspire, so you can have an opponent mill 8 for the low cost of 1 mana. Epiphany at the Drownyard, which is one of my favorite cards, mostly because of the X ability, so you can control the number of cards you reveal to an opponent, but also it can be played at instant speed, which is always a great advantage. Echoing Truth, to really deal with permanence, so there's not a lot of defense against enchantments and artifacts here, so bouncing permanence is the key to staving off things that are going to stop or limit your attack strategy. Disdainful Stroke is a counter. Displacement Wave really supports the theme, the whole spreading seas kind of thing. But again, expel, so you can control how many creatures or which creatures you bounce. Walk the Plank, simply for flavor. On the topic of flavor, Diabolic Vision, so 2 mana. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. 1 goes into your hand, the rest go back on top of your library in any order. But look at that artwork. You know, I wouldn't want that thing peeking in through my window. Mind Grind for the mill, Consign for the permanent control, and it's got the Aftermath of Oblivion to also nail an opponent to discard 2 cards. Counter Squall. Not only do you counter a non-creature spell, but the controller loses 2 life, so that's full support for Sygg. Now, we're at the Mountains of Madness with this card, Glimpse of the Unthinkable, which I'd like to think they printed purely as an homage to Mr. Lovecraft. So target player actually puts the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. Great card. I could not put this in this deck. So it's mandatory for a Sygg Rexial build. Now we get into the counter spell. So you know a lot of Dimir is about stopping problems before they become problems, so to speak. So we start with Thought Collapse. Not only does it counter, but the controller puts the top 3 cards of their library into the graveyard, so the best of both worlds there. Undermine, the controller of the spell that's countered loses 3 life. Soul Manipulation to handle a creature spell, but also return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Psychic Strike, which does some milling as well. I like Deep Analysis because of the flashback ability, and ironically, you lose 3 life to activate the flashback cost, but some card draw there. Engulf the Shore. Again, this is another controllable sort of board wipe. Return all creatures to their owner's hand with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. So Rexial has toughness 8, so potentially you're going to wash the board, no pun intended, and put things heavily back in Rexial's favor and give him a clear shot at somebody who has a very healthy graveyard to access some spells from. And the great thing about Engulf the Shore is also it can be played at instant speed. Talon of the Telepath, which shares a lot of properties with Rexial's ability. So target opponent reveals the top 7. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from among them without paying its mana cost. However, if you got Spellmaster, you may cast 2 or more instants without paying their mana cost. So that goes hand in hand with Rexial, and because it also mills at the same time, that has full synergy with the deck's main strategy. Biting Rain, which is I would describe as a mild board wipe, so it will really target the lower end token creatures and stop somebody from going wide, but it also has the Madness activation, which can be useful in this deck, which I'll show shortly. Creeping Chill, 3 damage to each opponent, you gain 3 life. Siphon Mind for a bit of hand disruption. Clutch of the Undercity, again for permanent control, but also to support Sygg, so the target permanent that's bounced, its controller loses 3 life. Clutch of the Undercity also has the transmute ability, so you can dig out a 4-mana card, of which there are many enchantments that are 4 mana. Ancient Excavation, I like its dual nature in that it enables you to draw cards, or you can implement the land cycling ability early game if you need to. So, you know, I like cards that can give yourselves options. Memory Plunder, so this was first printed in Shadowmoor. That really looks like Sygg in the artwork there, and even though it refers to Grench Merrow Cutthroat, we don't know who Grench is or when he will ever be printed. He sounds interesting, but it fully supports Rexial. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost, so that's mandatory here. Shadow Slice, target opponent loses 3 life, but I like the Cipher ability. So the Cipher is that it once the spell resolves, the card is exiled onto a creature, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you may cast this spell again without paying its mana cost. So if you've got unblockables, if you've turned some lands into islands, and you've got a creature that is sneaking or swimming through, you're nailing them for an extra 3 with combat damage on top of that. Look at that squid horror face. So, you know, Chasm Skulker crawling up through the toilet where you'd expect him to be. Extract from Darkness, 5 mana. Each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then you may put a creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So again, great support for that milling graveyard strategy. Tassigur's Cruelty, in here for the discard effect, so each opponent discards 2 cards, and 6 mana might be steep, but it's got the delve ability, so you can reduce that cost. And finally, Spell Twine. So not only does Spell Twine enable you to cast a spell or an instant or sorcery spell from an opponent's graveyard, but you can also cast one from your own as well. So a double hit there with Spell Twine, and really looks like it's summoning something from another world. So artwork is always a bonus point for any deck that I make. Now finally we get to the enchantments. So we start with the Shrieking Affliction on the lower end of the scale. Let's be honest, not many players enjoy discarding cards, so you don't want to make yourself a target too aggressively. But at the same time, this supports Sygg a lot, in that if at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if they have one or fewer cards in hand, they lose 3 life. So if you can get that discard strategy going, you can get that Shrieking Affliction activation triggering more times than your opponents would like. We've got a few cards that support the Island Walk theme. So Sea's Claim is one. Spreading Seas, which also has a cantrip effect. This card is really designed for whichever commander is going to be Rexial or Sygg. But as long as enchanted creature is blue, it gets +1/+1, and whenever it deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. If it's black, it gets +1/+1, and whenever it deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card. So a bit of a double support there. Blood Reckoning, which is another passive life loss effect. So 4 mana. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller loses 1 life. I like cards that put pressure on your opponent. So normally in Commander, everybody's thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead in terms of what they want to be doing to win the game. Torment of Scarabs adds a little bit extra pressure in that it makes somebody think 2 or 3 steps ahead in how to prevent themselves from losing a game. So I like that kind of added pressure. At the beginning of Enchanted players' upkeep, they either lose 3 life, unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. So this one wrecks your own hand too, but obviously with the card draw mechanics going on, you're hopefully ahead of everybody in terms of the card advantage stakes. But at the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card, and each opponent who discards a card that shares a card type with the card you discarded loses 3 life. 6 mana, a bit overcosted for a land aura, but another passive life loss that's generally unpreventable because target player loses 3 life, unless they have hexproof or something. But Caustic Tar is generally going to stick, no pun intended, and it has its worth in a Sygg deck. And the final enchantment is Hedonist's Trove. Exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard. You can play land cards that are exiled with it, and you may play non-land cards that have been exiled by Hedonist's Trove as well. Now, the only downside is that you need to have the same mana as the graveyard that you've exiled. But obviously with the milling strategy, if you can target someone with Sewer Nemesis, or you can hit them with a really big mind grind, Hedonist's Trove is a great option for late in the game to try and swing things back in your favor, or try and rebuild your board state using somebody else's cards that they paid for. So that brings me to the end of my latest Commander deck. I'm really looking forward to taking it into action and trying it out in the game that's coming up. So that'll be up on the channel soon, so hopefully you can watch that and see how things went. But thanks for watching if you made it this far. I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Keep enjoying Magic, and until the next edition.